Hello, everyone. Welcome to Web3 Talks. I'm Lisa Amnegard, and today we will be discussing blockchain regulation and its effects on crypto and cryptocurrency. Joining me today is Elias Ahonen, author and legal crypto expert, particularly when it comes to the blockchain. So thank you so much, Elias, for joining me.
Thank you, Lisa.
And your journey into the crypto world is quite spectacular. Back in 2016, when most people did not know what Bitcoin was, you went ahead and you wrote your first book about physical cryptocurrencies. And then you went on to write a second book, Blockland, which has become somewhat of an industry textbook when it comes to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Since Blockland, you've been coined the first Bitcoin historian. So how do you become a Bitcoin historian?
Well, I think that was actually from this first book back in 2016. And the idea with the first one was that I looked at the symbolism in these coins. So as early as 2011, these physical coins showed imagery. It showed pictures of doves, of bulls, of imagining anonymous with a mask or something like this. And by looking at these images, I could tell the story of what is this movement about? What do people see in Bitcoin? And what do people see in blockchain? What is the ideology or the philosophy that is driving this? So that's where that title came about. And that's also what inspired Blockland later. That was after a few years spent consulting in the industry. And Blockland is a history of the first decade of the movement, whether it's the history of mining, whether it's the history of government's first reactions to technology, or the internal conflicts and things that spread it out, whether it was the Ethereum, whether it was ICOs, whether it was other blockchains and ways of seeing the industry.
Yeah, and now I feel that we are in a crossroads when it comes to crypto and also regulation, and you have gone ahead and pursued a PhD to sort of define blockchain law, which is quite interesting because when it comes to crypto, the whole idea, the fundamental value of the industry is around decentralization. So why should the blockchain be regulated, and what effects will that have on crypto?
Well, this goes back again to the consulting days when I was helping projects create new cryptocurrencies. Is one thing that there was constantly a need for was lawyers. Everyone needed lawyers that knew something about blockchain, who could apply existing rules and regulations to cryptocurrencies and tokens. And the lawyer was sometimes the most highly paid member of a team. And that's where I saw the need that we need to research this further. So I pursued a master's degree and later now a PhD at the University of Turku in Finland, regarding in law, regarding the question of, is there an area of law that could be called blockchain law? Is that area of law arising? And really, if we look at old developments in technology, every time we've increased capabilities from technology, whether it's by being able to sail on the ocean, or fly to space, or even fly in the air, we've had new areas of law develop around those, whether it's maritime law, aviation law, or space law. And fundamentally, if you look at law, where does it come from? It comes from a court or a government ultimately controlling land.
Yeah.
And now when we're operating in blockchain, it's somewhere else. If a transaction happens on the Ethereum blockchain, if a DAO sends money to a smart contract and acquires an NFT, what country does it happen in? And there's really no clarity. It's almost like asking, what country is the space station in? Or if there's a ship in the Atlantic, what country is it in? Now, there are rules around that. There are flags on the ships, so on. But it's a new way of looking at things. And I'm trying to lay the framework to help crystallize these kinds of thinking, because this is all a very new concept.
And when we think about regulation, there are a lot of new technologies that have come about recently. For example, AI, and that's also a gray area where some countries want to regulate it, others don't. We see the EU, for example. I think they went out in 2021 and they said we have an AI Act and it's bulletproof. And then along came ChatGPT in 2022 and everything was obsolete. So when it comes to blockchain law, is that also an area where it could be better to wait and see what happens, or should governments around the world be regulating it now?
Well, ultimately, regulation usually comes after the fact. Innovation happens first, and governments tend to play catch-up. Some governments might be a little bit ahead of the curve. Some governments might be very much behind the curve. And there might be advantages to both. If you're very much ahead of the curve, such as the UAE, for example, setting clear rules around legislation, rules, then that might create a certain amount of certainty, which might bring companies into the country. On the other hand, if a government is very late in regulating and maintains a lot of ambiguity, then they might maintain a lot of room for maneuvering, where they might see the mistakes that some of the tip of the spear makes, so to say, and innovates and can change course so that mistakes aren't repeated. So it's not there's no direct answer, we could
Not
say.
black and white. And in your opinion, what are the biggest risks of not regulating the blockchain?
Well, I think if you don't regulate the blockchain, I think there's the original criticisms, we could say. Well, if we go back to what is financial regulation, there's very stringent AML, anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing rules around banking institutions, rules around antitrust, things like taxation. And those transactions are regulated, and they're scrutinized. And if you don't regulate cryptocurrency at all, then a lot of these actions that are trying to be snuffed out in the traditional finance sphere would simply move to the crypto sphere. And that would mean that in addition to all the good stuff happening, all the bad stuff, so to say, will go into crypto, and that is a reputational risk for the industry and also for companies operating in it. So we're seeing that with many exchanges, my own exchange as well. We have to comply with very stringent anti-money laundering legislation, MiCA regulations in Europe, for example, to make sure that we're effectively operating much like any institution or entity that is dealing with large amounts of fiat currency, which most exchanges are.
Yeah, exactly. And when you were talking about just regulation and in general, if we look at like we said before, the fundamentals of crypto and blockchain and its nature of being decentralized, do you think Bitcoin would survive regulation if the blockchain was regulated?
So again, it depends what we mean by regulation. The ultimate regulation is simply saying something is illegal and you can't have it. And even that gets very complex, because what does it mean to hold Bitcoin? Can you knowingly even get rid of Bitcoin? Where does it go? Because you can't destroy Bitcoin. But I think that's beyond the point. I don't think that's the direction anywhere in the Western world, let's say, or the Middle East is going. Bitcoin is it's reaching all-time highs. It's been around for a long time. I think that time to do away with it was at least 5 years ago. Now that said, regulations, I believe, are coming to regulate it similarly to other financial products, and that's happening already. Whether it's as a commodity, whether it's as property, whether it is regulated as a stock or something like this, which Bitcoin is not, in my opinion. But these are also questions that the SEC is struggling with in the US, whether Ethereum is a security or an equity or a commodity and such.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's, I feel many countries are in a crossroads where they don't know really how to govern it. But the UAE, they've had some progress in sort of providing some clarity around what is allowed and what isn't, the VARA and ADGM. In your opinion, which of these frameworks is better for crypto, or for or you have an exchange, for example? So,
well, we've certainly we can look at the outcomes, what's happening, and we can see that crypto companies, investment firms, high net worth individuals are coming to the UAE in part because of these rules, because they see that here is a country that understands the needs that this business or individual has, and they feel that they're not going to face sudden changes in course. They're not going to suddenly face limitations. They're not going to suddenly face surprise taxes, so to say, or rules around transactions. So there's a certain security in that, and that's certainly evidence that this is working and bringing in business. I know that in the US for a long time, there's been a lot of regulatory uncertainty where projects such as Ripple have started and they've been operating for some years, and then suddenly, even though they've asked the government agencies for clarity, they've ignored them, and then they come back and sue them and charge them with serious crimes. And that creates an atmosphere of fear, of uncertainty, and I think that stifles innovation.
I definitely agree with that. And when it comes to just blockchain law in general, it's not only crypto. Where do you see blockchain law having the most effect?
So I think as far as digital assets, whether we're talking cryptocurrencies, whether we're talking NFTs, whether we're talking tokens that represent real-world assets, RWAs, real-world assets, those are probably the first things in the blockchain sphere to face significant regulatory and legal questions because they represent money, assets, and people tend to gravitate their interests around those, and those are the things that people tend to fight about fundamentally. Now, if we look at DAOs, DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations, are a new phenomena operating on the blockchain as well, and fundamentally they are not necessarily connected to digital cryptocurrencies. They're more governance schemes that allow token holders to vote within an organization. They're almost like a new type of organizational structure that is comparable to a government or comparable to a corporate governance model, but operating on the blockchain outside of regulation. So the blockchain is the regulator of the system. And at the University of Turku, we actually have a DAO governance and a DAO research project where we're looking at how DAOs are helping reach the UN development goals, whether it's climate change, whether it's equity, gender equity, these kinds of things, democracy, because it allows for grassroots organization across barriers.
And what kind of outcomes have you been exploring?
Well, I think my research isn't quite there yet to give clear outcomes or clear estimations, but I think that the amount of global commerce investing transactions on the blockchain is going to increase dramatically. And I think that the number of decentralized autonomous organizations is going to grow significantly. The amount of global assets they're going to control is going to grow significantly. And we're going to see an environment where the role of the state as a regulator, relatively speaking, is somewhat diminished, at least in this capacity, because we're going to see decisions being made not in the traditional corporate framework, but in the DAO framework. And then questions of what country it should be the regulator, what country do taxes go to, these kinds of questions, they're going to be big questions in the next decade.
Now that you're halfway through your PhD, what are the types of conversations you would like to discuss with governments or with actors in the blockchain space?
Well, I think one of the big questions is what is the real status of blockchain? Where does it, well, really, if you think about the internet, I like to use this example that the internet is like a tree, and websites are branches, or it's a number of trees. And if there's a website where something needs to be taken out, something needs to be changed, ultimately you can see which country that tree is growing in, and then that country can regulate the tree on their land. They can cut it down, they can take off a branch or a leaf. So really, even though the internet is a huge innovation, it's effective. It's more or less based upon our existing legal framework. Whereas the blockchain, it's not necessarily growing out of the ground. It's almost like a cloud, where the cloud is passing, and you could say that, well, these water drops are dropping on our land, but it's difficult to grasp in the same way. And I think even more so than having the conversation, it's having the discussion and the understanding of what actually is the government's capability to regulate this. Because, I mean, back in the ancient Egypt, the pharaoh said that they're the ones that make the sun go up and the moon come up, and they didn't. This was out of their domain, and I think that conversation has to happen. Is that what is the real status of the blockchain metaverse in the global political sphere? Does it exist within it, or does it almost exist outside of it? Is it like the international waters or outer space?
And what do you think?
I think I need to maintain some neutrality as a researcher, but I think that it's a terrain that is very difficult for existing legal mechanisms to operate within.
Thank you so much, Elias, for speaking with me today. But before we end this episode, I would like to ask, where can we buy your book?
Thank you, Lisa. You can find it on Amazon if you just search Blockland book. And you can also find me on Twitter at Ahonen.
Thank you so much again. And thank you for watching. We have more content on Web3 TV, so make sure to tune in again. I'm Lisa Amnegard, and thank you again for watching.